My editor, who's very much older than me, has just accused me of showing my age. It's Justin Trudeau. I'm glad that his father's not alive to hear me make that mistake. Viva Fidel! The Canadian Prime Minister, though, has taken flight from Ottawa as the entire city has become log-jammed, a kind of gigantic truck. I don't know, a pile-up. There's no room for any more trucks in Ottawa. What a great idea. I wish I'd thought of that. Thousands and thousands of Canadian truckers have taken to the highways of Canada, and they are many and big, in order to demonstrate their rejection of the idea of the state forcing you to take a vaccination. This forcible medication would be difficult to justify in any circumstances. Certainly, I have always opposed it. But where it's an experimental vaccine that hasn't gone through the usual rigmarole before a vaccine is finally passed fit for human purpose, it's clearly ridiculous and entirely counterproductive. I speak as a triple-jabbed man myself because I trust my doctor and she told me to take it. But if Boris Johnson had passed a law forcing me to take it, well, that would quite likely have made me stand up and refuse. Do you see where I'm going here? And it's always the Liberals that turn out to be the most authoritarian people on the planet. Take a look at social media and you can see the witch hunting of Djokovic, the hatred of the truckers. Canadian Broadcast Corporation, CBC, actually said on its flagship news program that Vladimir Putin was behind the Canadian truckers. I did find and post a picture of President Putin driving one of the Canadian trucks. But whilst he might be on the convoy, he definitely didn't organize it. That was homegrown Canadian work. But the idea that hard-working, blue-collar men and women, truck drivers, should be smeared as Russian assets because they're standing up for their freedom to decide whether or not to take a vaccine tells you almost everything that you need to know about the current state of left versus right, where cross-dressing, forgive me, has become the order of the day. That which was right is now left, that which is left is now right. I said almost enough to sum up where we are today. But the Spotify row over Joe Rogan surely takes the biscuit. Now, I'm one of the few people on the planet, it seems, who has never set eyes on Joe Rogan or heard his voice in any form or medium, although many of my friends say that he's absolutely terrific. But though I cannot testify to that, I am prepared to say that if Spotify cancelled Joe Rogan, I'm cancelling Spotify. But Spotify so far are standing up to the pressure. Mind you, it was first applied by somebody called Neil Young, who last had a hit record in the 1970s. He said, it's Joe Rogan or me. And Spotify said, well, in that case, we'll take Joe Rogan. But then Joni Mitchell, of all people, the poster girl of liberalism, the California Canadian icon of freedom, she took her music off in protest at Spotify's refusal to remove Joe Rogan. And now they're queuing up to threaten that they will withdraw their music from Spotify. Except James, is it Blunt or Hunt? James Blunt. He was beautiful once. He threatened to to download more music, upload more music onto Spotify if they dare to cancel Joe Rogan. I'm going to buy some blunt music, although I was never his biggest fan. But you see where I'm going with this. This kind of political cross-dressing has now become utterly bewildering. Just last weekend, on my drive down from Scotland to London, in the course of my journey, I discovered that hundreds of people were earnestly discussing whether or not I had a mean and harsh attitude to refugees and maybe a rampant transphobe. Neither allegation of which, of course, is true, but serious people discuss this and then block you and cancel you because somebody said you were a transphobe or that you were against refugees. This kind of cancel culture has grown grotesquely, quickly, and it's gone far. We've got a poll on it. Should all artists boycott Spotify until they sack Joe Rogan? A, yes. B, no. Please vote now on my Twitter account or on my YouTube channel or on my Telegram channel. That's not, of course, all that we're going to be discussing this evening. We'll be talking in a minute to one of the very brightest young men I've come across in many years. He is the youngest RT correspondent in Moscow. He's American. He'll continue to be the youngest for some time. As I was once, I tell him myself, I was once the youngest ever everything. I've got the newspaper cuttings that show me as the youngest ever this, that, and the next thing. He won't remain the youngest forever, but he is so good, I predict a very big future for him. We're going to be talking to him regularly. From Moscow, this time about Ukraine and whether or not there's going to be a war. It seems to me that the fox has been shot. It's been shot not just by Russia, which has maintained resolutely from the beginning that it has absolutely no intention of invading Ukraine, but it's been shot again from the president of Ukraine. If he's not careful, Joe Biden is going to regime change him and replace him, per the Sunday Times, with a better president that is more friendly towards the United States. The president of Ukraine says this has all been a disaster for Ukraine. It's wiped billions of the share price of Ukraine. It's got people fleeing from what has now become a Potemkin state. When Ukraine became independent, it had a population of 52 million. That's more than 30 years ago. Its population now should be, on that basis, 70 million. But it's actually now 33 million and falling. And people are packing and running, including the diplomats of the countries that are determined to provoke a war to every last Ukrainian. They want to fight Russia with the blood of the Ukrainian people. And certainly the wreckage that they have wreaked now on the Ukrainian economy is plain to see. If you don't have to believe me, you can believe the Ukrainian government themselves. We'll be talking also about the 50th anniversary, which falls on this very day, of the mass murder of 14 unarmed civilian marchers on a civil rights march in Derry. 50 years have gone by. 14 people were shot dead. I think 26 or 36 people in total were shot. But 14 of them were shot dead in the United Kingdom. Imagine if it had happened in London. Imagine if it had happened in Manchester. 14 civilians shot dead. Of course, the murderers were in the uniform of the British Army, the parachute regiment to be precise. We even know who the murderers were, although Boris Johnson has now made it impossible for the surviving murderers ever to be brought to justice before the courts, even though the British state, in the Savile inquiry and in David Cameron's, I think, heartfelt apology, has accepted absolute responsibility for murder. The murder of Irish people who were British citizens and were shot dead by the British Army for the crime of demanding civil rights on a peaceful march. Now, of course, the state lied comprehensively about it and appointed the liar-in-chief, Lord Justice Widgery, to falsely conclude in the Widgery inquiry that shots were fired from the demonstration, casting doubt on whether the 14 dead Irish people had been carrying weapons, had fired weapons. All of it was a lie, a bright, shining lie, a gigantic lie. It was murder most foul in broad daylight on television of innocent, unarmed protesters. It wasn't even a boisterous protest. It was more like the vigil that happened in Derry this day, on which thousands took to the streets to remember the carnage that day and to express their support and sympathy, empathy with the families of those who were cruelly murdered that day. But it happened in my lifetime. I watched it on my television. I watched as Widgery whitewashed the massacre. And I watched when David Cameron came to the dispatch box to respond to the findings of the Savile inquiry, to declare that all of the British narrative that had gone before had been a pack of lies, and that these innocent, unarmed people had all been murdered in plain sight by the British Army. He expressed an apology and compensation of sorts, as if you can be compensated for your father or your brother, your son, being shot down dead in the street on Bloody Sunday, 50 years ago today. We'll be talking about that also. We'll be talking about the United States with Garland Nixon, where all kinds of wheels are turning. It is self-evidently clear, clearer with every press conference, that President Biden shouldn't be left with any but his coat buttons that he might press accidentally. Where it is increasingly abundantly clear that you would not send Joe Biden out for a loaf. Abundantly clear that it is bordering on, if not over the border, of elder abuse to pretend that this man is running the most powerful, violent country on the earth. For that is what it is. But here's the rub. If Joe Biden's not running America, who is? It's certainly not the Vice President, Kamala Harris, whose ratings are plummeting lower and lower every week and are far lower even than the semi-senile President Biden. Nobody's trusting Kamala Harris. In fact, she wants out. She's begun to brief the media that she never really wanted to be in the Washington bubble and is looking for ways out. So if not Biden and not Harris, who is running America? Well, a clue might be in the increased desperation to find a war to force other people to fight. And that isn't going well. NATO is splintering apart in front of our eyes. Germany wants nothing to do with a military confrontation with Russia, maybe because they have some experience of that matter. France wants nothing to do with it. As a matter of fact, France and Germany and Ukraine and Russia are about to have their own four-party talks, cutting out the United States, because increasingly it is obvious to more and more European countries that the United States is ready to fight wars to the last drop of their blood. The Slovakian president said that he'd withdraw all Slovak troops from NATO if war broke out at US behest in the Ukraine. And he wasn't the only one. The Bulgarians have made it clear. No, we're all right, Joe. Don't send any American troops over here. We don't need them and we don't want them. It is beginning to be clear that the strategic decision to exclude Russia from the European security architecture upon the fall of the Soviet Union, so that they could still have an enemy to justify their presence and their spending on weapons, was a great mistake. As I said here last week, Russia is a European, Christian, capitalist country. There is no reason whatsoever for it to be the enemy of other European, Christian, capitalist countries. No reason except the determination of the United States to exclude Russia for its own geopolitical purposes. But the law of unintended consequences, as it often does, has kicked in. The US allies in Europe are beginning to question the value of the European-United States relationship. And Russia has grown ever closer to China, where the sun is very definitely rising. The Chinese are kickboxing while we are tickboxing.